Those are the only choices that you have left me.
Dave Rubin.
I'm so curious. What is the context of this conversation?
Whose career required Vaush took the criticism really well, explaining that actually, I just didn't understand the complex tactical arguments for the moral necessity of being misogynistic to J.K. Rowling. And then he accused me of cancel culturing him, while at the same time literally telling his followers to publicly shame me.
The more of you were in the replies being like, that's not what's happening right here. Like, this is necessary, okay? Publicly shame her into changing her mind on that.
Then bringing up my past struggle with addiction.
Move you off this site and into, I don't want to bring up the substance abuse.
So that pretty much confirms to me that Vaush is now
oh no, Vaush, what's happening?
Chapter 1, Anita. The most famous bigot in American LGBT history is a woman called Anita Bryant. 1977 was not a good time to be gay. Is it ever really a good time to be gay? In 1969, the Stonewall riots forced gay rights into national consciousness. The first pride parades were held in the summer of 1970, and in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, but only after gay activists disrupted their conference and shouted, "Gay conversion therapy is torture. We have abnormal urges, and we will not be silenced." Because that's the only way to get anything done in this country. You have to be super annoying about it. They give you no choice. On January 18th, 1977, Dade County, Florida, known for such popular cities as
Miami,
approved a law that added the phrase affectional or sexual preference to its non-discrimination ordinance, effectively banning housing and employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. And it was just then, as things seemed to be getting better, that Anita Bryant made her little appearance.
Anita Bryant, Miss Oklahoma!
Anita Bryant is a native Oklahoman who once had a career as a pop singer, beauty queen, and spokeswoman for the Florida Citrus Commission.
Come to the Florida Sunshine Tree.
My twins love 100% orange juice from Florida any time of day.
Cute. When Anita heard her pastor speak about this non-discrimination ordinance, she felt a divine disturbance in her heart. How touching.
Damn. Damn.
As a mother, she would not stand for this. So Anita wrote a letter to the county commissioner saying,
"As a concerned mother of 4 children, I am most definitely against this ordinance amendment. I have never condoned nor taught my children discrimination against anyone. But if this ordinance amendment is allowed to become law, you will, in fact, be infringing upon my rights and discriminating against me as a citizen and a mother to teach my children God's moral code as stated in the Holy Scriptures."
Damn.
Anita, kill your shitty child. When the amendment passed, Anita created a campaign for its repeal, the Save Our Children Coalition, which sponsored provocative TV ads.
I thought she was going to say kill yourself, which would have been way more base, but...
implying that gay people are degenerates who ruin communities and seduce children.
The campaign has been vicious. With television commercials, the Save Our Children group is appealing to parental anxieties, saying gays will flaunt their homosexuality before impressionable children.
The Orange Bowl Parade, Miami's gift to the nation, wholesome entertainment. But in San Francisco, when they take to the streets, it's a parade of homosexuals, men hugging other men, cavorting with little boys.
Save Our Children sparked the first organized backlash to gay rights in the United States, escalating the conflict into a national controversy. On one side were the gay rights activists, who argued that non-discrimination was a matter of human rights. On the opposing side, Anita Bryant argued that the non-discrimination ordinance would give special privileges to homosexuals.
We all believe in human rights, but we don't believe human rights that would corrupt our children or for individuals that have special privileges.
Was this in... I don't know if I read this in my subreddit or something different. Fuck, where did I read this? Somebody that's like... It feels like people have a phrase where they say, destroy society, but they use that phrase instead of, I don't like it. So like if you replace the phrase one with the other, it always works. So whenever somebody's like, oh, this is horrible because it's destructive to society, it's like, destructive how? They never actually have ways of like measuring it or counting for it to see what it is. It really just means like, I don't like this thing. Like, this is destructive towards society. Who's it destructive towards? Is it actually? Or are you just trying to say you don't like that thing? I don't know if I read this on my server or not, but it's like an interesting way of like viewing that phrase. I think Ayla. Oh, maybe Ayla posted on Twitter. It might have been. Oh, actually, I think it was actually. Societal harm is mostly not real. It usually functions as a boogeyman people slap onto things as a way to justify their disdain. I feel disgusted isn't a strong moral argument, so people use the nobler sounding, you're harming society, invent some damage so you can be a hero. I'm sure there are some things where there's an exception to this, like child porn. Legalizing it would probably harm society in measurable ways. But like, I can see the argument for that statement.
As long as they don't want to flaunt their homosexuality, they have equal rights the same as anyone else.
In other words, gay people already have equal rights, just as long as they stay in the closet and don't do anything gay. That's very helpful. Thank you so much, Anita, for standing up for our right to be gay in secret.
As long as they do their job and do not want to come out of the closet and force their homosexuality on being in the areas of business or in the schools, they can live their life, and we're not going out after their jobs and trying to get them out of their teaching jobs or housing.
Anita also argued that allowing flaunting
That didn't age well.
homosexuals to teach children was tantamount to gay recruitment.
Just biologically, that God made mothers so that we can reproduce. Homosexuals cannot reproduce biologically, but they have to reproduce by recruiting our children.
It's the exact same argument that's being used today by right-wing politicians who claim that queer people are groomers.
Stop confusing our babies with your groomer gender ideologue.
This wicked book, me and Earl and the dying girl sexually indoctrinated with wicked, vile books. And she believes in traditional marriage between a man and a woman. And in that book, it talked about two moms.
Stay away from the children creep or you will regret it. People should definitely arm themselves. I agree with that.
The Democrats are the party of pedophiles. The Democrats are the party of teachers, elementary school teachers trying to transition their elementary school age children and convince them they're a different gender.
They're just evil people, and they want to groom kids.
Yeah.
They're recruiting.
If you don't know what furries are, it's where school children dress up as animals, cats or dogs, during the school day. They meow and they bark.
What a great country we live in. I love it so much. Gay people around the country rallied against Anita Bryant and Save Our Children. There was a national boycott of Florida orange juice, with many gay bars taking screwdrivers off the menu and replacing them with an apple juice and vodka cocktail called an Anita Bryant. Let's make one now. Forgot my cocktail measure, so I'm just gonna have to eyeball this. Just a dash of apple juice. Give it a stir. Needs a garnish. Stunning. I mean, it's not as good as a screwdriver, but if I was in the 70s, I would have thrown back so many of these goddamn things out of pure spite. There's a story that Troy Perry, the founder of the gay-affirming Metropolitan Community Church, was on a transcontinental flight, and when the attendant put a glass of orange juice on his tray, he said, "Take that away. I'm a homosexual." At gay pride marches in 1977 and 78, anti-Anita Bryant slogans featured prominently on t-shirts, signs, and buttons. Anita Bryant sucks oranges. A day without lesbians is like a day without sunshine. True. And meanwhile, Anita's campaign inspired more anti-gay legislation, including bans on gay adoption and same-sex marriage, both of which passed in the Florida Senate, as well as the failed Briggs Initiative in California, which would have forced public schools to fire gay teachers. So Anita Bryant was worse than a bigot. She was an influential bigot, but she may also have helped to unify and galvanize gay activists by providing them with a common enemy. According to historian Lillian Faderman, Anita Bryant created fervent activists out of those who'd previously been content simply to enjoy their newfound freedoms. Faderman cites Eric Hoffer's observation that a mass movement can get along fine without a god, but it won't get along at all without a devil. For gay people all over the country, Anita Bryant became that devil.
I think that she is rallying the community together like I have never seen before. There's no way I could have done it on my own.
So even though she succeeded in her initial goal to repeal the non-discrimination ordinance, there is no question that, in the long term, Anita Bryant was the loser. She took a lot of L's. RIP.
L's.
For the short remainder of her career, Gay activists protested her events. They shut down the tour for her book about how persecuted she was by the militant homosexual, and they succeeded in turning public opinion against Anita Bryant to the point that she became virtually unemployable in mainstream entertainment.
Damn.
And it helped that she came across as kind of a judgmental prude that even hip straight people didn't want to be associated with.
Our top story tonight, Anita Bryant, former mediocre actress and orange juice promoter, performed coitus in public yesterday and campaigned to promote heterosexuality.
We don't serve orange juice anymore.
Like she famously told Playboy magazine,
"Why do you think the homosexuals are called fruits? It's because they eat the forbidden fruit of the tree of life. God referred to men as trees, and because the homosexuals eat the forbidden fruit, which is male sperm."
Oh my God. Like the woman is heterosexual cringe. This is how you lose the culture war.
So let's all squeeze a fruit for Anita. Pass a little juice around.
And of course, there was the famous incident where a gay activist smashed a banana cream pie in Anita's face during a TV appearance.
And went into a place called Norfolk, Virginia, and were met with protest and all kinds of problems. And
Security agent, security agent.
No, let him stay.
No.
Let him stay.
Well, at least it's a fruit pie.
Miami-Dade County finally reinstated the non-discrimination ordinance in 1998, and they added gender identity to its protections in 2014. In 2021, Anita took another metaphorical pie to the face when her granddaughter, Sarah Green, came out as gay, announcing her marriage to a woman and publicly struggling with whether to even invite her grandmother to the ceremony.
It's very hard to argue with someone who thinks that like an integral part of your identity is just an evil delusion.
That it is, Sarah. That it is. So that's the story of Anita Bryant as students of LGBT history know it. But isn't it a bit one-sided? Wasn't there a lot of toxicity on both sides?
The Anita Bryant forces talk of absolute truth and morality. Gay leaders are equally dogmatic about human rights.
A plague on both the houses.
Isn't it cruel, even, to slur Anita as a bigot and a homophobe? In fact, isn't it possible that Anita Bryant was the real victim? Oh no. Oh no! I can't do this anymore. I'm eating my pie. I'm eating my goddamn pie. Chapter 2. The Witch Trials of Anita Bryant. God help us all. The mainstream media would have us believe that Anita Bryant is a so-called homophobe, some kind of hateful bigot. But isn't this just an authoritarian tactic used to silence valid concerns? Mothers in this country are worried about their children going to school to be taught by perverts. How can we be so sure that the militant homosexuals weren't the real bigots? Isn't it possible that Anita Bryant was the first victim of cancel culture, of, dare I say it, wokeism? Well, no, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But suppose that you're an idiot, and suppose that that's the narrative you wanted to promote. Well, what would be your argument? I mean, if someone put a gun to my head and forced me to make that argument, I'd probably say something like this. Anita Bryant lived a difficult life. In 1940, she was born into brutal poverty in rural Oklahoma. Her parents divorced when she was just 2 years old, the same year she made her singing debut at the Baptist church.
Parts of my childhood I blocked out because it hurts too much. I guess I was happiest when I was 8 years old, and my parents were remarried, and I was baptized and came to know Christ as my personal savior.
Her father abandoned the family again when she was 12.
It was real painful, and it just about killed my mother. She was a very submissive wife. She was too submissive, and it angered me. She let my dad step all over her. Because of him, I think I went through life for a long time hating all men.
He described her most intense adolescent memory as a feeling of intense ambition.
A relentless drive to succeed at doing well the thing I loved.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
But Anita's
maybe everybody in life is just a series of who hurt yous. Like for this lady, it was men. For me, it's everybody. For Hitler, it was art critics. For Myron, it was some black woman at some point in time.
ambition conflicted with her submissive role as a traditional Christian woman. In 1960, Anita married Bob Green, Miami's top disc jockey, though only after he relentlessly badgered her into it.
This is what heterosexuals do, fellas.
Green was allegedly a controlling and abusive husband. Feminist Andrea Dworkin claims
Green manipulated Bryant with a cruelty nearly unmatched in modern love stories.
And Anita rationalized the abuse, saying,
"Despite our sometimes violent scraps, I love him for it."
But while submitting to her husband and raising 4 children, Anita was still able to build the career she'd always wanted. By the 1970s, she was on the payroll of Big Orange Juice, earning $500,000 a year,
Jesus.
enough to move her family into a 27-room Spanish mansion on Biscayne Bay. So Anita Bryant struggled all her life for her success. Did she really deserve to lose it all just because she took a stand for something she believed in?
Anita Bryant's role as a leader in the campaign against homosexuals may be hurting her campaign to sell orange juice.
Are you being blackballed?
Wait, what is this? Dead Island 2 coming out in 3 days. Do you remember the initial? This must have been, was it 10 years ago? The Dead Island 1 trailer came out, and it was like, people were like, it was such a cool, awesome, cute narrative trailer, and the game was like forgotten about in like 3 days. Does anybody remember this? The game was good though, was it? The Dead Island 2 trailer is 10 years old. Wait, that was the trailer for this game? No, I thought that was the Dead Island 1 trailer. No, that was the Dead Island 1 trailer, you moron. You. Dead Island, official trailer. Wait, was this trailer for the game that's coming out now? No, it is what you're thinking. Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm right.
Well, it looks that way. It's worse than that. We're being threatened and.
Sexuals may be hurting her campaign to sell orange juice.
Are you being blackballed?
Well, it looks that way. It's worse than that. We're being threatened and there's all kinds of harassment, even with my job with Florida Citrus.
Her entire life had become a series of catastrophes.
Damn.
She'd been dropped as spokesperson by the Orange Growers. She had been dropped as a commentator on the Orange Bowl Parade. She lost a television show contract. Her bookings dropped drastically. No one has paid as dearly as Anita Bryant for taking a public stand on something she believed in.
I remember lying in the bed in my mother's house in a fetal position and wanting to die.
Gay activists in the 1970s didn't exactly limit their tactics to polite debate in the free marketplace of ideas.
Stop Anita now! Stop Anita now! Stop Anita!
Homosexuals started fighting back. The gays formed new groups and picketed the performers' public appearances, forcing her to cancel a few.
Gay activists routinely compared Anita to Adolf H. They created pastiches of her orange juice slogan. They blamed her for hate crimes. They burned her in effigy. They disrupted events she was involved in. They printed toilet paper with her face on it. Some sent Anita death threats, or they mailed her rotting oranges, dead cockroaches, human excrement. See, this is how you canceled people before phones. Instead of shitposting, you would simply mail actual human shit through the United States Postal Service. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night. Anita's husband pleaded to supporters.
How would you men feel if you opened a letter and there was a photo of your wife's head superimposed on some other female nude body in the most lewd and shocking sexual act you can imagine?
Can imagine quite a lot. I do think it would be fair to say that a lot of the rhetoric did take on a misogynistic tone. Lillian Faderman recounts that lesbians, particularly lesbian feminists, abhorred the sexist terms that were being used to characterize Anita Bryant. Bitch and whore, gay men called her. The harassment escalated to the point where Anita had to cancel her book tour due to demonstrations and bomb threats from gay activists.
Damn.
And of course, there was the pie. So much for the tolerant Mattachine Society. It's kind of a deep cut. Well, something to entertain the boomer queers. Gay activists claimed to stand for human rights, but what about Anita's right to free speech? I wish I had some literal pearls to clutch. Civil libertarian Nat Hentoff wrote in his 1992 book, Free Speech for Me, But Not for Thee, that the orange juice boycott reminded him of a little thing called McCarthyism. Have you ever considered that being pro-gay is quite similar to being anti-gay, and that both are opinions? As Anita tells it, she and her foot soldiers of God were the victims of sinister gay carpetbaggers.
The foot soldiers were housewives and mothers, religious and civic leaders in opposition to a well-organized, highly financed, and politically militant group of homosexual activists. We were cast as bigots, haters, discriminators, and deniers of basic human rights. And all of this happened because we were sincerely concerned for our children and our community.
So Anita's version of the story is that she and a handful of well-intentioned Christian mothers were cast as bigots by a highly funded mafia of gay extremists, all because they had a few teensy tiny concerns about the militant homosexual cavorting with little boys.
Cavorting with little boys.
Is it really fair to call this woman a bigot? Until the Dade County Ordinance, Anita was a registered Democrat and considered herself a liberal. And she never said that she hated gay people or wanted them dead. In fact, she even said that she loves homosexuals.
I love homosexuals, if you can believe that. I love them enough to tell them the truth, because I know that there is hope for the homosexuals, that if they're willing to turn from sin, the same as any individual, that they can be ex-homosexuals, the same as there can be an ex-murderer, an ex-thief, or ex-anybody.
Wow. She loves homosexuals because they can change, just like murderers. Would a bigot have said that? Just about McF***ing had it. Anita was so kind-hearted, she even said that she related to the homosexual.
I can relate to the homosexual because I've had emotional scars in my own life. I really felt the rejection of my father, and that is one of the things that maybe leads someone going into homosexuality. Look, I don't hate homosexuals. That's the truth, no matter what they think of my motives. I've always said I love the sinner, but I hate the sin.
Wow, what an empath. You know, I actually think it's really noble how she's able to project all of her own emotional baggage onto the marginalized group whose rights she's trying to take away. Okay. So we've given a fair hearing to both sides, to many sides. We've considered all the evidence. Now, let's suppose there's no longer a gun to my head and ask, did Anita Bryant really deserve that pie to the face? Well, yes, obviously. Look, the point I'm trying to make here is that it's possible to take genuine virtues like nuance, empathy, and impartiality and to twist them into up apologia for horrible oppressive behavior. If you play this game long enough, you can essentially explain away the entire concept of bigotry and conclude that, in reality, there are no bigots. There's only tragically misunderstood people with difficult childhoods and valid concerns cruelly demonized by militant activists defaming and silencing them with such reputation-ruining slurs as homophobe. Now, because you, viewers, are smart, media-literate people, you understand framing, so you already know that I'm about to compare Anita Bryant to J.K. Rowling. In case you didn't know, J.K. Rowling is a popular author who used to write whimsical stories about wizard school, but who now writes books about transvestite serial killers masturbating into stolen panties because she's lost her goddamn mind. Lo ho ho, dear readers. Christ, what a nightmare. Chapter 3, The Witch Trials of J.
Again, I think that, like, without getting, I'm probably going to disagree with most of her analysis here. I agree that there are going to be some, like, a person that is pro-gay rights and a person that is anti-gay rights are not the same. You can't say that, oh, they're just two different opinions. Yeah, sure. Like, I can have the opinion that you should be genocided. That's an opinion, right? However, it is important that there is a norm set to discourse, because whose opinion is right and whose opinion is wrong is oftentimes subject to the subjective whims of society. What are gay rights today, 100 years ago, could have been most people protesting for, gay genocide. So I think it's important to establish some norms of like conversation in society. For instance, we probably shouldn't be like attacking people over their opinions or throwing pies at them or other forms of like assaults. Probably not a good idea in general.
J.K. Rowling. All right, kids. It's transit time. Last year, I agreed to be a guest on a podcast about J.K. Rowling, hosted by Megan Phelps Roper, an escapee from the Westboro Baptist Church, the notorious hate group from Topeka, Kansas, most known for protesting the funerals of soldiers with signs that say God hates God and me both. I'm tired of you people. JK Illy. The Westboro Baptist Church is one of the most famous homophobic hate groups in the world. In a way, I'm like a lifelong fan of these people. I've watched all the Louis Theroux documentaries. I went to a counter protest in 2010. I remember how when I was in high school, the Westboro Baptist Church was like the one thing that conservatives and liberals could agree on because they hated the troops and the gays, essentially the two genders of 2006. But let's not pretend that the Westboro Baptist Church is all bad. Okay, when Megan was at Westboro, she used to do these amazing Lady Gaga parodies about how the gays are going to hell, which to this day, I am a big fan of.
But what did you say? You think God loves your praying? He hates all you do cause you love fornicating. Fornicating.
It's perfect. I love it. Played at my funeral. Megan left the Westboro Baptist Church in 2012 after a crisis of faith precipitated by a power struggle within the church. She wrote about all this in her book Unfollow, which is honestly a pretty interesting account of deconversion and the circumstances that lead someone to leaving a hate group. Megan contacted me for her podcast because I had criticized J.K. Rowling in a video a couple years ago. Now you might be wondering, why would I think that a person who's been carrying a God hates sign most of her life would be the correct person to lead an international conversation about the intricacies of LGBT issues?
Because I'm an idiot. Happy?
Basically, I agreed to the podcast because it's a pretty irresistible pitch. A former member of the Westboro Baptist Church wants to mediate a conversation between me and the author of Harry Potter. Would you say no to that? Maybe. If you're smart. Last month, the podcast was announced in an essay by Megan titled The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. Obviously a tendentious framing that posits Jo Rowe as the target of an irrational trans witch hunt. The essay included a teaser quote from Rowling complaining that she's been profoundly misunderstood, as well as a photo of an angry trans mob holding a "Rotten Hell Rowling" sign, juxtaposed with an image of conservative Christians burning Harry Potter books in the early 2000s. This did not bode well. So I disavowed the podcast on Twitter because I didn't want my name lending legitimacy to some kind of unearned J.K. Rowling redemption tour. This caused Megan's mom, Shirley, to quote tweet me, calling me a bigot against God. I mean, God is one of the most vulnerable minorities. There's only one of him, and he could really use your help, Shirley. I said in these tweets that I felt used, which that is how I felt, but ultimately, I need to take full responsibility for my involvement in this. The thing about being a guest on a documentary like this is you honestly have no idea what the final product is gonna be like. So the decision to participate is always a leap of faith. And I can't really say that Megan misled me. There were red flags from the beginning, and I ignored them because I was projecting my own hopes onto the situation. You know, it's a compelling story. I liked the idea that this famous former bigot could talk some sense into a famous current bigot. We all love a good redemption arc, and I started my career de-radicalizing the alt-right. That's something I've moved away from, but there's still part of me that wants to see the best in me. And to believe that people can change if you just talk to them and make a good enough argument. Maybe my wishful thinking was that because Megan left Westboro, that must mean that she must understand the intricacies of anti-LGBT bigotry, right? And despite no evidence for this, My hope was that Megan would act as the trans ally and could be really effective at confronting Joro about all the transphobic stuff she says, right? Wrong.
I'm Megan Phelps Roper, and these are the witch trials of J.K. Rowling.
The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling is more than 7 hours of apologetics for JKR. The podcast presents Rowling as a complex, humane, heroic figure with an inspiring feminist backstory.
Jo Rowling's rise to success is this sort of feminist Cinderella story.
Now cruelly besieged by a vicious mob of transgender activists, all because she, as a woman, had a few tiny concerns about the transgender rapists.
I had been becoming increasingly concerned about the way in which women were being shut down, women who I felt had some very valid concerns.
Megan uncritically accepts Rowling's framing of the conflict as feminists versus trans rights activists, whom Rowling describes as
a powerful, insidious, misogynistic movement.
For the first 5 hours of this podcast, Rowling's critics are presented as an irrational mob of enraged, shrieking, sexually violent fanatics.
You are murdering trans children! Get up, my time!
A huge amount of, I want her to choke on my fat trans.
And you did it at my birthday dinner.
There's this one clip of some kind of Antifa super soldiers' abrasive screaming that they play like once per episode.
You ugly piece of shit! You look like you got your teeth knocked out, you fascist!
Damn.
Nobody knows who you are and nobody cares and you will die alone!
And then it usually cuts to like somber monks chanting some kind of medieval lament.
You will die alone and you will burn in hell!
It's just so dramatic.
Just in case you didn't get from the title that this is a witch hunt. Do you guys get it? Do you get it yet?
You got your teeth knocked out, you fascist! Get up, my time!
And then these mobs of irrational, misogynistic trans rights fanatics are contrasted with this poignant story of how J.K. Rowling escaped her abusive husband to publish our generation's most beloved novels.
I was still very committed to those parts that I plotted in darkness, as it were, because there was a truth to them, and there was a power to them.
The only voices of genuine trans dissent appear in episode 6 out of 7, more than 5 hours in. And there's only 2 of us. One is me, Shame, and the other is a teenager named Noah, who kind of just seems like he wants to be liked and understood, and wishes that his favorite author would please stop saying bigoted things about him.
I'm such a big Harry Potter fan, or I was such a big Harry Potter fan, especially because it was so hard to be in the real world. I can't even state how important it was to me. J.K. Rowling, I stole her biography from my 3rd grade classroom and I kept it for a long time because I just loved reading it because I just admired her so much.
It's honestly pretty heartbreaking to listen to. On my last day editing this video, I got in touch with Noah. I asked him if he had any thoughts about the podcast he wanted me to pass along, and this is what he said.
I want to emphasize that the stakes of this issue are very different from any sort of rhetorical debate. Conversation, dialogue, and debate are important, but for many of the most vulnerable people in society, the outcome of this conversation dictates their health, well-being, and ability to survive. How we treat or talk to people like J.K. Rowling should come second to fighting for maintained access to healthcare, support, and general resources for children and adolescents seeking gender care.
Wow.
I agree. The most frustrating thing about this podcast is that it refuses to be honest about what it is. They spend 7 hours implying that J.K. Rowling is the victim of a witch hunt in the most heavy-handed way imaginable.
These are the witch trials of J.K. Rowling.
I mean, turf is basically witch.
But if you point this out, They just deny it. Show me the actual words, Jack. Show me where I said I'm the victim of a witch hunt by trans people.
You're on a podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling.
Yes, a podcast on which I never once say I'm a victim of a witch hunt by trans people.
What are you talking about? I'm not scamming the government, if that's what you're saying.
Your license plate says scamming.
No. What do you mean, no? Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna commit to this. I need to watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. How many seasons are there to catch up on? I feel like I've only seen like 4 or 5 episodes from start to finish. Every I see is so good. 16 seasons, really?
Man, show me where I ever said that I'm the target of a witch hunt, you liar. Why would you even think that? You're crazy. By the way, come get your This Witch Doesn't Burn t-shirt for sale now at Wild Woman Workshop. And Megan is not much better. Like, there's this whole section in episode 2 where Megan interviews Christians who burned Harry Potter books in the 1990s, and this is obviously meant to be foreshadowing.
So, looking back, would you say that the Christian parents were maybe part of a moral panic?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a scary world out there.
Megan doesn't explicitly say she thinks trans protests against Joe Roe are equivalent to the Christian ones in the 90s, but she does heavily imply it.
There was an explosive reaction to Rowling's tweets, which led many, including lifelong fans of her work, to condemn her and to call for her books to be banned, boycotted, and in some cases, burned.
When confronted about the obvious implications of the podcast's title, Megan said, "The title is ambiguous. Toward the end of our conversations, I spent a long time talking with J.K. Rowling about discernment, about how a person can ever know if they're standing up for what's right or joining a moral panic. I think you'll be surprised by the thoughts she shares." Megan, I was not surprised.
I know I won't ever regret having stood up on this issue, ever.
The podcast released new episodes weekly, and whenever Megan was challenged about the blatant one-sidedness, Megan would respond, "Oh, you just think that because you haven't listened to the whole podcast yet. Maybe you should reserve judgment. Much more of Other Perspectives is coming. Make sure to tune in next week. More bombshell revelations to come." Well, I've listened to the whole podcast now, and I truly do not think that anyone with basic media comprehension skills could...
Wait, what is this marijuana shit that people are linking? Hold on, I'm so confused. Destiny correction. Look at this YouTube comment. Someone said she looks tired because I'm not marginalized. I wouldn't understand being tired. I can't believe my landlord just kicked me out after 4 years because they can't viably raise my rent, so they kicked me out in order to raise the rent on the next sucker. Is that legal? I don't know anything about like UK housing laws or whatever. Or Portugal or Europe or whatever the fuck. Okay, I don't care about your personal YouTube comment section battles.
Come away from this thinking that the main intent was anything other than to portray J.K. Rowling as the martyr of an unjust, what's the word? Witch hunt? This is the obvious implication of the podcast from the first words to the very last. And of course, Rowling does literally get the last word. The final episode concludes with this.
There are more important things in this world than being popular. And that doesn't mean it's more important to me to be right. It means it's more important to me to do the right thing.
Why would you end on that note? Hi. Why would anything about this podcast be the way it is if Megan didn't fundamentally believe that J.K. Rowling is in the right?
I don't regret it because I did the right thing.
Like, there really is no other reasonable way to interpret this. So I wish that she would just be honest. If you believe that J.K. Rowling is the misunderstood victim of a witch hunt, then just say that. Make the argument you want to make. Don't crouch and hide behind this disavowal, this obfuscating veil of just asking questions. Don't rely on innuendo and framing and lachrymose Gregorian chanting to make your point, while coyly denying you have any kind of agenda beyond, I just believe in conversation. I don't know. I just find this a slippery and dishonest way to argue. But if you happen to be a fan of slippery and dishonest arguments, you're in luck, because there is more where that came from. This video is sponsored by Cannabox.
Sponsor!
Cannabox offers fresh human meat delivered directly to your doorstep. As an alphabet mafiosa, sometimes I just can't fit the most dangerous game into my busy lifestyle of destroying the family and recruiting children. Whenever a new box arrives, I get out my copy of Bless This Food, the Anita Bryant Family Cookbook. The best thing about human meat delivered to your home by mail in the dead of night? You don't know who you're eating, so it's totally guilt-free and ethically sourced. Maybe. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism. That means you're not allowed to cancel me. Chapter 4. Okay. Joe Rose Transphobia.
Okay, dude.
That's it. I'm going full Slytherin. In episode 5 of The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, Joe compares trans activists to Death Eaters, the fictionalized fascists in Harry Potter.
My position is that this activist movement, in the form that it's currently taking, echoes the very thing that I was warning against in Harry Potter. The Death Eaters claimed we have been made to live in secret, and now is our time. I am fighting what I see as a powerful, insidious, misogynistic movement.
When an article then claimed she had equated trans people to Death Eaters, the podcast's PR firm reached out demanding a correction, because she only equated the movement to Death Eaters, not trans people in general. Yeah, I don't hate marginalized people, I just hate it when they advocate for themselves. So I do have to be very careful with my wording here, lest a defamation letter arrive by owl. J.K. Rowling's bigotry is exhausting to argue with, because she expresses it as an endless series of what are called Mott and Bailey arguments. A Mott and Bailey argument is named after a type of castle consisting of a motte, that is, a tower atop a mound or hill, easy to defend, and a bailey, a fenced courtyard that's much more vulnerable to attack, difficult to defend. So a Mott and Bailey argument is when someone makes a provocative claim that's difficult to defend, the bailey. And then, when confronted with
Pretty cringe that she's stealing content from my stream from years ago.
counter arguments, they walk it back to a much less...
This is why Vaush is bad for trans discourse. He's directly fed into her broad point that is all secretly misogyny. Did I ever read that email that I got a long time ago about TERF shit? I wonder if it would be appropriate to read this now. Oh God, it's such a long email. I can't read this whole thing. It's actually like, it was a really long email. But I'll do the Vaush part real quick. Okay, this is a woman, I guess, that used to be, this used to be a Vaush fan. I'll just read these two paragraphs. This is a summary of a summary after all of this. If you take anything from what I've written, I would take this. Trans women have played a fundamental, pivotal role in de-radicalizing TERFs. I don't think anyone else has been as successful, if at all, and I don't think anyone else will be. The bulk of my experiences are from 5 to 10 years ago, but I will attempt to frame them in a way that you can relate to. I think it has gotten a little bit better, but I'm quickly learning that the battle for trans rights is still plagued by the same themes and characters. I've stopped engaging, so it's hard for me to say for sure, but just looking from the outside in, I see people like Vaush, who are neither trans nor a woman, effectively meaning he is nothing more than a cis man, making misogynistic comments, quote, in the name of trans activism, end quote, or people saying, quote, maybe we shouldn't have women in sports, end quote, etc. I see it for what it is, a fucking gold mine for TERFs to capitalize on. The misogyny from Vaush is the best recruiting material in the world. It cannot be understated how good it is for them. It is the trans discourse equivalent of proof of WMDs in comparison to comments like, quote, maybe we should do away with women in sports, end quote, which is more akin to an ISIS beheading video. It does far more harm for trans women, because TERFs usually have to point to crazy or misogynistic things that trans activists say that come from people like Demon Mama, who happen to be trans, and no one can really argue that Demon Mama isn't part of an oppressed group, so there's still that discomfort because her word can be hand-waved as an oppressed person punching up, or just an oppressed person being frustrated at a perceived oppressor. Meanwhile, Vaush is a cis man who is perceived to be speaking from the position of a group of people who are the facilitators of gendered oppression, or have been at least throughout history, so his words carry a lot more weight than some frustrated trans woman, because TERFs can use it to point to it as and say, quote, see, men are just using trans ideology to oppress us, end quote. It is a lot easier to develop a boogeyman or an enemy when you develop a narrative that your enemy is supported by a group of people who have historically held all of the power in the first place. This is when I was playing Elden Ring. This email was April 12th, 2022, so about a year ago. It was kind of interesting reading this. I probably make some misogynistic jokes, I think. I'm trying to think. Do people think I actually hate women? I don't think so. Probably because I argue so much red pill shit. I feel like my positions are clear. I think an issue that I'm running into, I've read comments, I'm trying to think of like, is Vaush's misogyny meme, or do people think that Vaush actually hates women? Do you really come away with that if you're a long-term viewer of Vaush's content? I'm not sure. The problem with Vaush is that some of the stuff that Vaush says, like insults towards other women, is like really, oof. I think that like my worst thing was probably calling like Lav a dumb bitch, I guess, which I'm probably okay with. But I think the Vaush thing about doing the misogyny tweet and then getting his audience to piggyback on it, and then when he got called out by that one British woman and saying like she looks like a woman that wants to be like sexually assaulted by people in an office, oh, that was a rough one. That time he said he wanted to bend the congresswoman over the table, I don't even know that one. I think, and then also, this is going to be like ultra subjective. I feel like my misogynistic jokes are usually fairly funny, which I think kind of defangs them a little bit. I think generally it's like kind of funny, but sometimes when I see some of the now this could just be me primed to not like Vaush, but I feel like sometimes when I see some of the Vaush misogynistic stuff, it's not really as funny. It's just like, oof. It's like, ugh. It's kind of like, it just seems like he's like kind of mean. But I could also be like, I could just be predispositioned to not like Vaush. So maybe I don't, so I could just be primed to like not think he's funny, right? That could be a thing.
Less controversial and easy.
I believe this is the Vaush clip.
Being a generous word.
Yeah, like this was such a rough thing. Like, oh man.
Picking apart my accent, my appearance, my outfit, and my persona. You know, all the things 12-year-old girls go for when they're feeling particularly bitchy. So it's difficult to be serious when I'm not given anything serious to work with. And then, because apparently he really wanted to prove my point about male feminists, he said this.
She's a pick-me. No wonder she's dressed like this. She's wearing a f***ing skirt with stockings. She just wants to live in Mad Men and be sexually harassed by like the office boys.
Like I'm trying to think of like, is there like a, I'm trying to think of like me shitting on a conservative woman. Like, is there a scenario where I would make like this, is there a scenario where I make like this series of jokes? I'm trying to think, like when I'm trying to think of like my misogynistic jokes, I feel like the worst one I've had, I think was probably the laugh thing, calling her a dumb bitch. This line of joking is like, oh man, we're really, 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 really extreme. Jesus, I don't know. It feels that way, but I could be biased. Is he even making a joke in this clip? Well, yeah. I mean, like, I think he's joking. I don't think he genuinely thinks this. Maybe? I don't think.
I'm sorry? I beg your pardon, sir. What was that? What do I want?
She just wants to live in Mad Men and be sexually harassed.
Yes, Vaush. You caught me.
Before they inevitably get ousted by some, like, QAnon magatard. Which, you know, good. Do some good on your way out. What do we think of Cinema's fit? Cinema has a fat ass, and I do want to bend her over a table. I'm not big into hate fucking, but, like...
Now to be fair, this was November. That was a long time ago. But now I'm trying to think, because, like... If you would have been like, if you would have just said like, Cinema's got a badonkadonk, I'd be like, okay. Cinema's got a badonkadonk. But if it's like, Cinema's got a badonkadonk that I want to bury the Sword of Arthur in, if you know what I mean. I feel like it's just like a step too far. Yeah, I don't know.
Easy to defend version of the claim. The Mott. For example, Rowling will make an ambiguous claim like...
Can you explain what it means to hate women? I don't personally see how jokes mean you hate them. How is calling someone a stupid bitch equivalent to hating an entire gender? Like, there's just like, it's a very, very, very careful line you have to walk. I don't know how to explain it, and I probably cross over it sometimes. Like, if I'm in the middle of the thing and I call Lav like a dumb bitch, okay? I think that's probably like people see like, okay, they have like a back and forth. But like sometimes I've made comments where it's like, this girl's got pretty girl syndrome. You can tell she's never been told no before. Like I've made that joke before. That's the type of joke you can hear. It's like, do you think that like all women that are like pretty heavily, like that's a joke where somebody could read a little bit more into it than like the lab bitch comment, right? I'm just saying there's certain jokes you make where like somebody will say something, or there's certain comments I should say, where you make and somebody can read like, okay, this is like genuinely like an analysis of an individual, blah, 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 versus like, here's a joke you're making or a comment you're making where it's like, do you hate women or do you know, and that's, yeah. I don't know. It's a very, very, very careful line you have to walk. Like, I'm sure that stuff that I've said is probably for some people already beyond the pale. Where like, oh, this guy probably hates women or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. Live tonight, setting up to catch a predator account with Tinder. We'll be catching predators on Tinder and catching them in real life. Jesus. When hearing these jokes over and over, you get tired of it and start to feel like you don't belong and you're being othered. Yeah, of course. Yeah, so there's like a fatiguing effect too. But then also, to be fair, I don't know how many times Vaush makes these jokes. Like maybe these are the only 4 misogynistic comments that Vaush has made all year. And if I regularly watch this content, maybe it wouldn't feel that way, you know? I don't know. Destiny, you said worse things. You said somebody gets raped on Twitter. This was like a 10-year-old tweet. This was a dumb tweet. I don't stand by this tweet. I don't know why you're bringing this up. That tweet was from like 2016, I think.
Sex is real. What does she mean by that? What are the implications? Well, in the podcast, she explains that she thinks it's very sinister that in the Associated Press style guide, it says that instead of referring to a trans woman as a man who identifies as a woman, journalists should simply say a trans woman is a woman.
That, from the Associated Press, is hugely powerful. They've edged from identifies as a woman, so a man identifies as a woman, and I think we all understand what that means, into is a woman. And that's precisely the creep that I'm talking about. We are using language to make accurate definition of sex difference unspeakable.
Which is, of course, false, because the words trans and cis exist.
Dude, people have been doing that creep. That is the thing that people do that I think is really weird. I feel like there was a period of time, I don't think it's happened, or I don't know if I've seen it recently, but people are doing this thing where it's like, oh yeah, like even by sex, you are like a trans woman is a woman, even sexually. Or like Vaush, that phrase that he made up, hormone wash, that biologically you can become a woman, right? And it's like, yeah, I don't know.
Exist precisely to make it easy to talk about sex difference. Thanks a lot, Tumblr. God, there's this whole section of the podcast that sort of implies...
Hold on, wait.
What's up, chat? How you doing?
You know, I sent you some suggestions for titles this morning. What'd you think of the last one? Because I have the domain for both of those. The last 2.
I don't know. I don't have strong feelings about anything right now. I feel like the best thing would be to record a couple episodes and then see what we feel like the direction that's going, and then we can kind of figure it out. Rather,
I'm just talking about a name. I'm not like trying to like, oh, we're getting solidified into something. I think that would just
but even the name, I think we'd probably change it after 12 like episodes or something anyway, right? Like, do we want to get tied down with a name?
Well, I mean, one of the names that I suggested there, like Overrussell, that's like that's pretty. Well, it's pretty generic. I imagine we're going to be fighting with each other a lot. That kind of implies that feeling, right?
Yeah. Are we trying to Overrussell people though?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah. Right.
I guess we don't know, huh?
I thought Angel Thump could be one. I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm flexible, but I feel like you're not committing a lot of big thoughts to this conversation right now.
Okay, this is how I feel. Okay, in my years of content creation.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You're just gonna see what sticks. I gotcha. No,
it's just important to do things, and then when you do things, you learn about them. That a lot of people will spend a ton of time like, oh, let's plan out like the perfect name and the images and blah 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 blah. That's like 10%, but who cares? The important thing is showing up and doing show. As soon as Adam okays the studio, we show up, we do an episode or 2 or 3. The names and all that shit will be easy. That's the easy part. I don't want to like go through all this like, oh, here's the name, here's the domain, here's blah blah blah, and then you do like one episode and it's like, this is boring, and then we're like done. It's like, what the fuck is the point?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, darktriadpodcast.com. Well,
there's no third person, so the triad doesn't really work that well anymore.
Have you even asked Anna if she wants to? God, she'd be a great third.
She wouldn't.
She would be.
What are you talking about? She's I don't want to talk. I mean, listen, it's got to be someone that can keep up. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. It's got like if we have someone who comes on and does like that type of shit, it's got to be someone who can keep up, and very few people can keep up. Yeah. Yes. Oh yeah. Man, there was some good options we talked about, but we're not going to be able to get. Especially now, I'm not going to be able to get up.
Not with that attitude.
We just need a producer. As I said, we need a H3H3 Dan guy. I need a Dan for my Dan, so to speak.
Okay. Like, yeah. I don't know if the producers they'll provide will be funny enough to be those people. I don't even think
they're probably almost definitely not, and they're probably not going to want to have anything to do or be on stream, would be my guess.
Why?
You think they will? I'd be surprised.
Hello?
But maybe I could be wrong.
I'm Destiny, okay? Why would you not want to share a stage with me?
Well, I mean, I can think of a few reasons for most people. I think I've kind of said them to you before. It's the affiliation with people who want to kill you, mostly. I mean, that's like pretty much every extremist group that there is hates you, I think. Is there anyone that doesn't?
And?
Well, that might be a reason that someone's like not trying to...
God, I miss And Guy so much.
Oh man, that was a good one.
And I ate ramen. I ate ramen every single fucking day.
I
ate ramen every day in college.
I don't understand. One of the funniest dudes I ever met when it comes to writing, and he just throws. I don't understand how he did so poorly. I don't know, man. I don't get people.
Okay. Anything else?
Did you just gotcha anything else to me? No, fine. Go back to your fucking video in silence.
Okay, love you.
Bitch.
That transgender people were invented on Tumblr, which I'm not even gonna get into because we don't have time. Rowling has also tweeted that she thinks that all people who menstruate must be referred to as women. Or was it wumpin? I'm pretty sure it was wump mud. So trans men and trans masculine people, they're all women and must be referred to as women because J.K. Rowling demands it. This is controversial, right? Calling trans women men who identify as women, calling trans men women. This is the Bailey in her Mott and Bailey argument. Trans women are men, trans men are women. That's the controversial interpretation of sex is real. Now, when accused of transphobia and facing backlash, Rowling walks the argument back and says, I'm being persecuted just for saying that women should be allowed to discuss how being female has shaped our lives. Women should be allowed to discuss how being female has shaped our lives. This is the obvious and utterly uncontroversial interpretation of sex is real. The Mott. And virtually every argument sophisticated transphobes make about trans people follows this pattern. J.K. Rowling's friend and ally Maya Forstater will tweet inflammatory things like, men cannot change into women. But then when she's criticized, she'll say that she's being attacked for gender-critical belief.
Gender-critical belief, which is the absolutely ordinary belief about sex, that your mother and your grandmother are women, that being female is a thing.
Your mother and grandmother are women. Being female is a thing. That's literally all I'm saying. But if that's literally all she was saying, then no one would be mad, would they? 9. Nar. Men cannot change into women is the Bailey. Your mom is a woman is the Mott. Your mom's a woman. This is why arguing with these people is infuriating. They'll insinuate that trans women are dangerous rapists, exhibitionists, and voyeurs. Then when trans people understandably get mad, they'll say, look, I'm being attacked just for saying that being female is part of my experience. It's dishonest. They talk a bunch of trash about trans people, and then when trans people talk trash back, they pretend that they're being victimized for making totally innocuous statements. We could name this behavior the birthday boy argument. I dated a 5'8" guy who'd taunt every jacked 6'3" bro he met until they'd pull their fist back to beat him up, whereupon my ex would go, hey, come on, I'm a little guy, I'm just a little guy, no, it's also my birthday, I'm a little birthday boy. And somehow it always worked. So a birthday boy argument is when you make aggressive, inflammatory assertions followed by, teacher, look what he's doing to me, when the target reacts with anything less than extreme politeness. Another common tactic you'll see anytime Rowling's transphobia is discussed is you'll see someone jump in to say, show me one thing she's said that's transphobic. For example, here's someone on Twitter called Large Gamete Producer. It's funny, isn't it, how these people will insist that awkward inclusive language like people who menstruate is horribly oppressive and degrading, but then they'll just straight up call themselves Large Gamete Producer. Which, by the way, is Rowling's definition of a woman.
The woman is the producer of the large gametes.
Oh, I like it. It's very brood mother. That Rowling's words regularly appear in gender-critical arguments shows the massive influence that she has in the anti-trans movement. She's like their queen, their leader, their headmistress. She's the best thing that ever happened to them, because Sheila Jeffries certainly wasn't persuading a lot of people. If you know, you know. Large Gamete Producer says, JK isn't anti-trans. Give me just one direct quote that she has said which is anti-trans. Oh, what's that? You can't find one? Well, color me shocked.
Imagine.
Before we waste our time trying to provide examples, let's take a look at Large Gamete Producer's profile. Trans women are not women, they are men. Trans men are not men, they are women. Nothing can change that. Sex is binary. Like, if this person doesn't think that trans women are men, trans men are women, is a transphobic statement, then what would they consider a transphobic statement? This is why the first question you should always ask such people is, do you believe that transphobia is a legitimate concept? What are some examples of statements that you would consider transphobic? Because many of them don't believe that transphobia is a valid concept because they don't think that trans people are a legitimate minority.
There's no such thing as a trans woman. There's no such thing as a trans person. There is no such thing. There are people that call themselves these things that may have other issues manifesting that then make them think they're this, but no, we have to stop using any words like transgender. There may be more words that we have to say in order to say that. We may call it transgender ideology, but when it comes to a person, they may be following transgender ideology, but they are not transgender. There is no such thing as a man or a woman being anything other than a man or a woman.
So when they say, show me an example of something transphobic J.K. Rowling has said, this is a trap. They're just messing with you. There's nothing that she could have said that they would acknowledge as transphobic. Now, if you're someone who believes that transphobia is a valid concept and you believe that trans people are a legitimate minority, but you just genuinely are unaware of what J.K. Rowling has said on the topic, then I will refer you to my past video on J.K. Rowling's transphobia rather than recapping it all here. Just keep in mind that she's gotten significantly worse since I made that video. I mean, just look at her Twitter feed. True, she never says the phrase, "I hate trans people," because she's not a complete idiot, but Anita Bryant never said, "I hate gay people." She said, "Save our children."
I love homosexuals.
For that matter, I'm pretty sure David Duke doesn't say, "I hate black people," but he will share a lot of statistics about anti-white crime. So this is not really a very good criterion for deciding who's a bigot, is it? What J.K. Rowling does do is tweet again and again about transgender rapists, about the danger trans women pose to cis women. She implies that trans-inclusive language is equivalent to the dystopia of Orwell's 1984. She writes at length about the vague, nefarious cabal of endocrinologists and ideologues that is supposedly persuading confused, vulnerable girls to transition. To quote Washington Post opinion writer Monica Hess, "I do not know what is in Rowling's heart, but reading her Twitter feed, this is the overall effect. Her Twitter feed does not ask its readers to think. It asks them to fear. It creates phobias of trans people. It creates trans phobias." If you will. Rowling has also attacked pro-trans politician Nicola Sturgeon, calling her destroyer of women's rights via a t-shirt she got from anti-trans hate monger Posey Parker.
There's no such thing as a trans woman. There's no such thing as a trans person. There is no such thing.
If there's one thing that I want people to understand about Rowling's transphobia, it's that this is not a case of someone posting a couple insensitive tweets that got blown out of proportion. Rowling is an extremely outspoken opponent of trans rights. This has been her main issue for several years now. And because she's so famous, she's become the de facto global champion of backlash to trans rights. Truly, the Anita Bryant of transphobia, except worse, because she's way more famous and way more liked than Anita Bryant ever was. Rowling has also praised self-described theocratic fascist Matt Walsh for his transphobic propaganda film.
Damn.
She refers to trans women as trans
What's that film called, guys?
males, known as Tims, among people for whom this has become an unhealthy obsession. She retweets images of the trans colors being erased from the progress flag, also the colors representing queer people of color, so, you know, great. Love that. Often, Rowling pretends that she's being transphobic for the principled and valiant purpose of defending lesbians. It's something of a fixation for her. I find this particularly gross because it plays into the lesbophobic trope that gay women are especially anti-trans, when in fact, they're the least transphobic demographic of cis people. According to a survey of young adults in the UK, lesbians were most likely to know a trans person and also most likely, at 96%, to say that they're supportive or very supportive of trans people. So I think it's fair to say that most gay women are probably not super thrilled whenever Joe Roe the lesbian defender logs on. My own partner is a cis lesbian, and I asked her if she enjoys J.K. Rowling defending her from the transsexuals, and she said,
"It makes me want to gouge out my eyes like Oedipus."
By the way, here is J.K. Rowling enjoying a bit of banter with her friend Baroness Emma Nicholson, the co-founder of Rowling's charity Lumos. Baroness Nicholson is a conservative member of the House of Lords who voted against same-sex marriage in 2013. In 2020, she tweeted in defense of her vote, claiming that gay marriage would lead to degrading the status of women and girls. Truly, one of the great lesbian allies. And in 2022, here is J.K. Rowling joking around with Lady Nicholson. Excellent question, Emma. Defining lesbians as same-sex attracted women excludes and depresses the most marginalized of all groups, i.e., people with penises and beards who want to shag women. And before you say, "But aren't they straight men? They're wearing eyeliner, bigot." Try for a moment to put aside any nostalgia you may have for the Gryffindor common room and just look at this interaction for what it is. Two straight women, one of whom is a homophobic peer of the realm, having a nice little chuckle together about how trans women are men wearing eyeliner. So that's it, right? It's over. Case closed. I still like hammering things. I'm not going to argue anymore about whether J.K. Rowling is transphobic, because anyone who believes in transphobia can see that obviously she is. The question now is whether transphobia is the sort of thing that progressives can denounce, the way we at least aspire to denounce racism, misogyny, and homophobia. That's usually what we're talking about when we talk about J.K. Rowling, right? Whether it's fair to cancel her. That's what The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling is about. The Rowling debate is a proxy for a larger question. Is transphobia a legitimate viewpoint worthy of polite consideration and respect in liberal, humane society? Or is it just an ugly prejudice that we can justifiably react to with scorn and condemnation? And there's an even broader...
I don't like the dichotomy there. Is it a legitimate opinion, or can we act with scorn and condemnation? Nobody has a problem with anybody reacting with scorn and condemnation. I think the issue is if you react with violence. I think that's the issue. Or like murderous like destruction, right? That's the issue. Like, no, I don't think... It's funny. Oh, this sounds so mean. I don't mean to say this, but it's funny because like she just did the Mott and Bailey that she accused J.K. Rowling or the other transphobes of doing, which I do think they do, by the way. I do agree with her. But like she just said, oh, like I just want to react with scorn and condemnation. But scorn and condemnation that she defended earlier was assault on a woman, was like running up to somebody smashing a pie in their face. That's not scorn and condemnation. That's something very different. Nobody is saying that you can't be scornful or condemnful, I think that's a word, of a person, right? So that she just kind of did like a Mott and Bailey there.
Question here about whether we can justifiably react to anything with scorn and condemnation. Is canceling ever warranted? Is it right to condemn racism, homophobia, and misogyny? Or should we allow spokespeople for these prejudices a respected position in the free marketplace of ideas, where we can all sit around debating the legitimacy of gay marriage or the possible merits of a white ethno-state? Is the final solution a myth promulgated by the international Jew? Are yoga pants to blame for sexual violence? Wouldn't the taxpayer save a lot of money if there weren't so many disabled people? Who knows? These are open questions. Let's sit down with people on both sides.
I don't know what fish tank is. I don't know why everybody's spamming fish tank in chat. I have no idea what any of that is.
On many sides and have calm, civil conversations about it for the rest of our goddamn lives. Chapter 5. Debate.
Oh, Sam Hyde thing. Okay, gotcha.
Sar, I know I did this look before and it's like not related to the video topic at all, but it just makes me feel sliving. The boy who slived. So Megan Phelps Roper's viewpoint seems to be that scorn and condemnation are never appropriate, that we should approach every conflict with empathy and compassion, even when dealing with the worst, most destructive people in the world.
Hi, my name is Megan, and my heretical belief is that even the people who seem to be the worst, most destructive people in the world are human beings who deserve compassion and empathy if we want to find a way to change their minds.
In her book, in her TED Talk, in her public appearances, Megan expresses the idea that society has recently become polarized in some unprecedented way, that we've all become extremists, that in some sense, we've all become the Westboro Baptist Church.
I can't help but see in our public discourse so many of the same destructive impulses that ruled my former church.
She identifies things like certainty, vilification of compromise, us versus them thinking, suppression of empathy, and celebration of death and misfortune as Westboro-like elements in public discourse. And this really bothers Megan because she claims that a decade ago, when she went on Twitter to tweet about how marriage is abominable to God, it was people who engaged her in a civil, rational way that eventually led her to renouncing Westboro's ideology. And I don't entirely disagree with Megan about this. She's totally right that if you want to change people's minds, then approaching them with compassion and empathy is usually the best way to do that. But Megan reaches another conclusion that I don't agree with, which is that because compassion and civil conversation are most likely to persuade people, we should never cancel anyone, even the most horrible bigots. And canceling is a pretty meaningless term at this point, but what Megan means is we shouldn't say mean things to bigots. We shouldn't.
Is that really what people mean by canceling? When we say that like cancel culture is bad, are we saying that people saying mean things to people is canceling? I feel like that is not at all what people mean when they talk about that. Maybe I'm wrong, but no, I'm not wrong. That's kind of a silly summary of like, what does it mean to cancel somebody?
Boycott or counter-protest or raise our voices. We shouldn't shun or exclude anyone, because that's just not how you change minds. And I get why Megan thinks this, right? De-radicalization was a really important part of her life experience. She's also clearly holding out hope that other members of her family will leave Westboro and have a life on the outside. She has a quote from her mom in her Twitter bio. The last lines of her book address her family. "I want to tell them that I love them. I'll just have to find another way." This is touching and human and also kind of a conflict of interest. The problem is, Megan's views about this only make sense if you assume that Megan is the main character of reality. If you assume that the moral improvement of bigots is more important than protecting the people they target. Or if you assume that changing bigots' minds is the only way to make social progress, which it isn't. As far as I know, Anita Bryant is 83 years old, and she's still homophobic. But even without Anita's blessing, gay rights have still somehow managed to progress since the 1970s. Because gay activists didn't need to persuade Anita Bryant. They needed to defeat her. And that's what they did. We have to accept that realistically, persuading all the bigots is just not an option. Yes, we should convince as many people as possible.
This is what I don't like about this idea that Contra has. So Contra has essentially created a world where she's saying you can't really use compassion or empathy or conversation or whatever to persuade people out of these bigoted positions. And if we turn to the record, if we look historically, people have been fairly aggressive and, they've made good progress in advancing rights for LGBT progressive causes, right? But here's the issue that we have. If we're taking being a nice person off the table, if that's just like a thing that we're not going to do anymore, what's going to happen if we hit an area where maybe we're heading to this area where we do start to slide back a bit on certain rights? Are we going to be in an area where, like, let's say, for instance, a bunch of anti-trans legislation does pass. Well, we've removed empathy from the table and activism isn't enough. Aren't we kind of backed into a corner there saying that, like, we're just going to have to start killing people? We're just going to have to start, like, being as radical and extreme as possible because that's the only thing left? Because if we've already said that, like, empathy and compassion isn't going to work, we have to be activists, and then the activism doesn't work, well, what's next? You're not going to go back to compassion. It seems like at that point, well, I guess we just got to go full-on violence murder mode. That's what it feels like.
Possible, but there will always be bigots. And mocking them, shaming them, or boycotting them is, I think, a perfectly valid strategy. Does that mean that when we cancel bigots, we're acting kind of like the Westboro Baptist Church? Nar. You would only think that if you're a total moral relativist. I guess controversial opinion, but bigotry is shameful, and it should be shamed. I'll say it. If you're testing out some racist ideas in your head, you might feel afraid to express them publicly for fear of being shamed or judged. Is that because we live in an Orwellian dystopia that punishes people for wrongthink? No, it's because racism is dangerous and shameful, and you should be ashamed of it, and the people judging you are right to do so. And sure, there are some very patient people who devote their lives to de-radicalizing bigots, which I think is a perfectly noble thing to do. There's a guy named Daryl Davis who's befriended members of the Ku Klux Klan for over 30 years, and he claims he's convinced more than 200 of them to leave. And good for him. De-radicalization is a valid strategy, but it cannot be the only strategy, and it must not be the primary strategy. Because we're not going to defeat racism by telling black people to be a little nicer to racists. Feminists would be wasting their time trying to convince Andrew...
I feel like and I understand it's for entertainment or edutainment, I guess you can call it, but like, we're not going to be nice by telling black people to be nice to racists. That's kind of like, if I summarize your position, it's like, well, we're not going to be nice by telling white people to kill themselves on Twitter either, right? I don't know.
rotate to respect women. In general, I think that the massive effort that it takes to maybe persuade bigots is better spent persuading other people not to listen to them. And it's also worth cautioning that de-radicalization is often a messy and incomplete process. 20-year-old white nationalist Peter Saitanovic became the face of the fascist Unite the Right rally in 2017 when a photo of him mid-scream, tiki torch in hand, was published in news outlets all over the country. Peter was unrepentant in interviews he gave immediately after the rally, but he began to question his beliefs after befriending a Muslim woman who, according to Charlotte MacDonald Gibson, challenged his views without insulting him, allowing him to understand the hurt he had caused. Peter is no longer a white nationalist, but that doesn't mean he's flushed out every trace of bigotry. In a 2019 interview with the London School of Economics student paper, Peter said,
"I don't like the whole transgender thing. You're born either a man or a woman."
So he maybe still has a little bit of work to do.
Okay, but like, damn, bro, being upgraded from a f***ing white nationalist Nazi to like a normal conservative. I understand that to progressives, it's all the same to you guys. That like, oh, well, that guy's a Nazi and that guy doesn't think trans people are real. They're basically both bigoted extremists. Like, okay, come on, Chief. There's a spectrum here, and this guy has advanced significantly along the spectrum. Jesus.
When I did de-radicalization work on YouTube, I used to get some criticism from people of color who were not thrilled that I was bringing a bunch of semi-reformed racists over to the left, a frustration that I totally understand. To paraphrase YouTuber Ian Danskin, diverse leftist communities are maybe not the best holding space for someone who's
a bit of a Nazi but working on it.
In the case of Megan Phelps-Roper, I don't know if she has lingering bigoted sentiments, but what she does have is a kind of hyper-vigilant skepticism about anything she perceives as ideology. This is pretty common with people who...
Her point is that it'd be more efficient to talk to moderate people, not that there's... Yeah, but you can talk to both. Why are we pretending that like you have like 1 second in your life and how to act, and you can either try to like not be insane versus I guess like extremists versus, or you could just like be nice, or wait, so what is she saying you should even do to moderates actually? Because isn't she still advocating at the end of the day for like rampant like intolerism towards ideas that she perceives to be as bigoted? Like, she shouldn't say it should be the primary or only strategy. Well, who says that it should be the primary or only strategy? I don't know if there's a place for like the massive like purity spiral and like the insane fucking... I just don't think Twitter activism... I don't know. I don't like it. I think it's cringe.
Used to be religious fundamentalists. They were so certain they were right, only to realize that everything they believed about the world is wrong. So they become distrustful of any strong moral convictions because it reminds them of their former fanaticism.
Coming from Westboro, where I believed so strongly that I was doing the right thing, and then to leave and come to believe that it was so destructive and harmful, I had this moment in time, and it lasted for many months, where I was like, how can I ever trust my own mind again?
This kind of skepticism is in some ways a good impulse, but valuing dispassionate intellectualism above all else can cause problems, especially where topics of social justice are concerned. Because it can lead you to this kind of toxic centrism that asks, why are marginalized people so unwilling to have calm, philosophical debates about whether they should have rights? Are they afraid of dangerous ideas? Atheist philosopher Sam Harris, in his podcast about Megan's podcast, can we talk about how there are too many podcasts? I'm calling for a complete and total shutdown of podcasts until we can figure out what's going on.
What the hell is going on?
Sam Harris, in his podcast about Megan's podcast, complained that trans activism and activism in general is plagued by mental illness and hysteria.
True.
I frankly think there's a fair degree of mental instability and even frank mental illness in the activist community. I mean, in really in all activist communities, the level of viciousness and hysteria is, it's hard to know what to compare it to.
Diversity when Man accuses trans women of being hysterical. Is it really hysteria to react with strong emotions when your basic inclusion in society is up for debate? Aren't there certain situations where strong emotions are warranted?
She's presenting her side as being so reasonable, like, oh, it's just strong emotions. I don't think it's just strong emotions that people are having an issue with. I don't think it's fair to summarize that as just strong emotions.
It reminds me of this awful episode of Joe Rogan feat Ben Shapiro, where Lil Benny argues that gay marriage is immoral with his usual whining sophistry, and Joe gently raises objections for Ben to talk circles around.
The human sex drive was made to procreate within a stable relationship in order to progenerate and have future generations of people. Misuse of that sex drive in any way, whether you're talking about from masturbation to homosexual activity, is therefore a diminishment of the use of that drive. That's the natural law case against homosexual activity.
All of the top comments on this video are like this.
Imagine talking about different beliefs while still having a productive conversation. Things progress when you don't demonize people.
The discussion here was excellent. Two guys with opposing opinions, speaking calmly and intellectually without cursing, shouting and making disparaging comments about each other. This is how it should be done. Kudos to both of them.
Joe is a great interviewer. He can totally disagree with someone and still have a calm, collective conversation. This is how it should be. Just two people sharing ideas, learning different point of views from each other. This is why Joe is the #1 podcast.
Joe Rogan beautifully asks the tough questions, and Ben answers honestly. He is strong in his faith. I love this debate because it's two so contrasting views and they have a civil conversation. Great learning.
And yeah, it's easy for two straight men to have a dispassionate, theoretical conversation about the ethics of homosexuality because it's not their lives and their relationships that are up for debate. These people don't understand the emotional burden placed on marginalized people.
Okay, this is an argument that I've given before. For me, as a white, straight, bi, whatever the fuck guy, it's easier for me to navigate these conversations in some ways because there's not really anything at stake for me, right? Especially being wealthy. It's not like I'm going to lose my rights, or it's not like some crazy shit is going to happen to me. That is a true point. However, there is an equally true point to be brought up on the other side. Not everybody has to be an activist, okay? If you feel like you are so emotionally compromised that you're not able to have a reasonable conversation with these topics, then don't. You don't have to. Nothing is forcing you to be an advocate for your existence. Nothing is forcing you to come out and be some insane activist that's trying to, right the wrongs of the world. Just don't be involved in that activism. You don't have to be. You can just live a normal life. That's okay too.
Who are asked to defend their rights. If you're straight, do you want to publicly debate whether your marriage is valid? Andrew Dworkin claimed that penetrative heterosexual intercourse is inherently an act of violence. I've noticed that most straight men don't want to have a calm, civil conversation about that. So imagine how they'd react if there was a powerful political movement to criminalize penetration or revoke their right to marry. Add in a lifetime of ostracism, family rejection, bullying, and discrimination, and maybe then you'll begin to understand the hysteria of a lot of queer people.
It is my right to raise my child with the moral precept that I find to be beneficial for my child. Beto O'Rourke does not get to raise my child. And if he tries, I will meet him at the door with a gun. That is insane.
Jesus Christ.
Ben
Bro, are you okay?
Threatening violence because he can't handle the debate. Sounds like a classic case of hysteria to me. Why can't Ben Shapiro just have a polite conversation about Beto O'Rourke transing his children?
I now have two choices. One is to leave the country utterly. Two is to pick up a gun. Those are the only choices that you have left me.
Dave Rubin.
I'm so curious. What is the context of this conversation?
Whose career requires that he convince his right-wing audience that he's one of the good ones. This means that he's willing to sit across from his so-called friend, homophobe Ben Shapiro, and listen to Ben say he would never attend his anniversary party because it would be tantamount to endorsing sin.
There's a difference between me just being friends with Dave and me actively participating in an event that I feel is religiously sinful.
The two of them then congratulate themselves about how they can still be great friends.
Why is it that we're able to do this and most people can't do this?
Because
that's what I'm curious about.
We go home at night and we can have our own lives.
And here's Dave having a civil conversation with conservative Glenn Beck, who compares homosexuality to alcoholism and then congratulates himself on having the conversation.
I'm a deeply religious man, and my religion
says man and a woman, that is the basic building block of family. And that's what I believe, but I also know God created you just like he created me, flaws and all. I believe I have a gene, they've never found it, that makes me very susceptible to alcoholism because it runs in my family. So does craziness, but it runs in my family.
Well, Dave smiles and nods, probably because he's thinking about how much he enjoys the taste of boots.
Usually, I just take out a picture of me and DeSantis, and then we're good, because they get it, that's my governor, yeah.
I think a lot of straight people look at Dave Rubin, and they see, finally, a reasonable gay person who doesn't scream bigot at everyone who disagrees and can actually have a civil conversation. But that's not what I see. I look at Dave Rubin and I see a spineless, boot-licking doormat who won't even defend his own family from the most fundamental disrespect. I also can't help but notice that none of these civil conversations seem to change anyone's mind. Persuasion is more complicated and less.
I also think that that's a hard one too. It's a really hard one for me to keep in mind as well. You're not usually going to change the mind of like the people that you're actually debating, like the shows that you're on. But I do think a lot of people in the audience can be slowly persuaded over time. But it is a project and a process.
Less rational than people think. Meghan often says that she was de-radicalized on Twitter, but if you read her book carefully, you'll notice that that's not exactly true. The major precipitating event for Meghan's crisis of faith was her mother's mistreatment at the hands of an increasingly misogynistic church leadership that made Meghan feel like she was the victim of the church for once. She says of the church discipline, "For the first time in my life, the accused were people I lived with and knew most intimately, and I knew that the judgments leveled by the elders were wrong. I could no longer blindly trust the judgment of these men." So she finally experienced firsthand what it's like to be the victim of her family. She stopped voting for the leopards eating people's faces party only when the leopards ate her face. It also seems relevant to notice that the people who had calm, civil conversations with Meghan on Twitter were generally not gay people, the people most affected by her family's violent rhetoric. They were mostly straight men, like director Kevin Smith, who started #SaveMeghan because, quote, "she's hot." There's often an erotic component to persuasion, and that certainly seems to be the case with Meghan, because one of the people who helped de-radicalize her is now her husband. And I feel like that's a relevant detail if we're trying to understand the role of reason and emotion.
This is how I try to de-radicalize women. Never mind, I'm just kidding.
In de-radicalization experiences. I think this experience is usually more akin to religious conversion than it is to logical reasoning. There's also a world of difference between the mostly private conversations that actually lead people to reflect on their beliefs and the spectacle of public debate. Ben Shapiro is never going to become less homophobic because he live streamed a civil conversation with Dave Rubin. So who is this conversation even for? Well, obviously it's for the audience. I think these civil conversations basically function to reassure a homophobic audience that just because they disagree with the lifestyle doesn't mean that they hate gay people. Look at Ben Shapiro. He's friends with a gay. Public debate is one way that we define the limits of the Overton window, the range of beliefs that is socially acceptable to hold. So often people who want to promote bigotry will use debate as a foot in the door. It's a way of establishing that their prejudices are within the realm of reasonable and socially accepted opinion. Here's obsessive anti-trans bigot Graham Linehan in a fury that a drag queen is on Doctor Who without the British public having a proper debate about these issues. Now, why do we need to have a proper debate about whether drag queens should be allowed on television when drag performance has been a staple of British entertainment since at least the time of Shakespeare?
Life is a joke that's just begun. Read gentlemen from school. Fishy, 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 fish.
As I am man, my state is desperate for my master's love. As I am woman, now alas the day.
Bigots like Graham want a perpetual debate on their own terms because this is how they dignify their pearl clutching. It's how they convince the public that their moral panic about drag queens on TV is actually a valid concern, rather than the tedious, small-minded whining about nothing that it really is. Having the debate on a bigot's terms is not a good way to win people over, unless you're really skilled in the art of humiliating people, which most of the time is what public debate is actually about. This is something that J.K. Rowling doesn't seem to understand. In the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, Jo takes a contradictory stance on deplatforming. She brings up right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos, saying that activists are making a strategic error and giving Milo power by protesting his events, making him look dangerous and sexy. But when trans people try to deplatform TERFs, Rowling characterizes this as silencing. So is deplatforming a strategic error that gives power to your opponent? Or is it a powerful tactic of silencing? I find Rowling's conviction that we ought to...
I think that the answer is, in a way, it's both, right? Like, this is something that I've said before. I think that deplatforming is effective in getting rid of a person, but I don't think it's good at getting rid of an idea. So while you could deplatform the fuck out of somebody and then get rid of that particular person, I think at the end... And actually, hold on, no, fuck. Actually, I shouldn't even brought into the premise. I don't know if deplatforming Milo Yiannopoulos was ever effective. I feel like deplatforming him blew that dude into orbit. Remember, deplatforming and canceling Milo Yiannopoulos, he is not an example of a successful deplatforming and canceling. Milo Yiannopoulos got destroyed because he did the pedophile thing. That's what him. It wasn't any amount of trans activism. It wasn't any amount of cancel culture. It wasn't any amount of progressives attacking him. It was him nuking himself, and then conservatives not liking him anymore because of the pedophile stuff. That was the big thing that him.
Debate Milo Yiannopoulos really out of touch. Milo Yiannopoulos doesn't have reasons for the things he does. He has strategies for humiliating people.
I've taken some time out of my busy schedule, being fabulous and doing my hair, to prepare a speech for you. Well, a few remarks, really. Feminism is cancer. Thank you very much.
To again quote Ian Danskin, you can't really reason with someone who thinks that feminism is cancer, because you don't reason with cancer, you eradicate it. Rowling objects to the slogan, no debate, in the strongest possible terms.
And then we come to the famous two-word slogan, the stock phrase, no debate, no debate, no debate. We hear it all the time. That alarms me, really alarms me. I can't think of a purer instance of authoritarianism than no debate.
It's kind of amazing to me that someone could think angry trans people on Twitter are the purest example of authoritarianism. I truly hope that one day I am privileged enough to be capable of such a perspective. Before I move on, I do want to clarify that I do think there are trans issues that are legitimately debatable by people who are not bigots. In my opinion, trans women in women's sports is one of those issues. But it's a complicated issue. Like, first of all, which sport are we talking about? Are we talking about figure skating? Middle school field hockey? I see no reason why trans girls should be excluded from that. But if we're talking about professional weightlifting, well, then it seems plausible that trans women who have been through male puberty may still retain some kind of group advantage. But not all trans women have experienced male puberty. People are transitioning younger now, and that's another thing you have to consider. So I'm not against debating this issue, I just want people to approach it with nuance and good faith. And currently, a lot of the people who are vocally against trans women in women's sports sound like this.
And we will keep men out of women's sports. Right? How ridiculous. That will take place on day one.
And I don't want to debate those people. I want to serve them a banana cream pie. Chapter 6. illiberal methods. One of J.K. Rowling's core complaints about the trans rights movement is she sees it as illiberal in its methods.
So when I first became interested and then deeply troubled by what I saw as a cultural movement that was illiberal in its methods.
So what are these illiberal methods?
If you are saying this person is cancelled, that is the language of a dictator.
It's true. Cancel culture is exactly how the Third Reich started. First, they canceled the socialists, and I did not speak out because the hashtag was trending. But maybe we should see what an actual dictator thinks.
Пресловутая культура отмены превратилась в отмену культуры. Не так давно отменили детского писателя Джоан Роулинг за то, что она, автор книг, которые разошлись по миру сотнями миллионов экземпляров, не угодила поклонникам так называемых гендерных свобод.
You know, I can't help but wonder what counts as acceptable activist methods to an author for whom Hermione protesting slavery was taking things too far.
I am fighting what I see as a powerful, insidious, misogynistic movement. I do not see this particular movement as either benign or powerless.
Rowling seems to think that the trans rights movement is dangerous and authoritarian in some unprecedented way that makes it different from all past liberation movements. But how? What are these illiberal methods that distinguish trans rights activism from similar past movements? Canceling? Anita Bryant was way more canceled than J.K. Rowling ever will be. Boycotts? Boycotts have been a staple of every progressive movement in modern history. Disrupting feminist meetings? Disrupting feminist meetings is a feminist tradition. Haven't you heard of the Lavender Menace? In 1969, Betty Friedan, author of The Feminine Mystique and founder of the National Organization for Women and Second Wave Feminism in general, coined the phrase Lavender Menace to describe the threat she believed that lesbians posed to the women's movement. Friedan was worried that being associated with lesbians would make it easy to dismiss the movement as a bunch of mannish man-haters. This understandably pissed off a bunch
Jesus, there's 40 minutes left. All right, hold on. People are saying X is on a run.
of lesbians who attended the Second Congress to Unite Women in 1970 to stage what used to be known as a ZAP, a disruptive public protest designed to draw attention to gay rights issues. Think glitter bombing, think pies, half aggression, half whimsy. Like that time the lesbian Avengers zapped Rowling's friend Baroness Nicholson's house, demanding that she resign. This podcast has pushed me over the edge. Centrism has gone too far and I am now pro-cancel culture. So just as the meeting was beginning, a group of 17 lesbians wearing Lavender Menace t-shirts switched off the lights, pulled the plug on the mic, and charged down the aisles laughing and screaming. Their leader, Rita Mae Brown, took the mic and yelled, "This conference won't proceed until we talk about lesbians in the women's movement." One of the NOW organizers yelled back, "I object to your coming in and taking over this meeting. You're acting like men." Betty Friedan would later speculate that the lesbians were a CIA psyop designed to make the women's movement look bad. So the Lavender Menace disrupted the feminist meeting using illiberal tactics, not because they were against feminism, but because they wanted lesbian exclusionary feminists to include them. It's the same thing that's happening today when trans people disrupt feminist meetings, as J.K. Rowling puts it, interestingly neglecting to mention which feminist meetings these are.
I was starting to see activists behaving in a very aggressive way outside feminist meetings. There was a feminist meeting in which they were banging and kicking on windows, very threatening.
There's a historical obliviousness to Rowling's idea that trans activists are somehow more aggressive than similar past movements. Like she retweeted a transphobic gay man called Dennis Noel Kavanaugh, who says, "All those gay rights and AIDS protests, I don't remember a single one where we intimidated or silenced a woman. Not a
That's probably way too much of an over-exaggeration.
Single one. Not a single one. Not a single one. Not a single one." Dennis has also tweeted that he preferred AIDS to the trans movement.
Jesus.
And also, quote, "I will fucking nail you to a wall what you have done to these innocent children. Your mutilation of these little humans because they were gay will be nothing compared to what I will to what I will do to you legally. You think you are ghouls? Wait till I deal with you, bastard, and I mean to." Dennis, It's time to log off, Gorge. I do wonder, does Dennis threatening to nail people to a wall count as illiberal methods? I guess J.K. Rowling doesn't think so because she's never condemned it. In fact, when Dennis's Twitter suspension ended, she was right there to welcome him back. And
Yikes,
she continues
fam.
to retweet him.
Yikes.
I've always been happy to acknowledge that angry trans people on Twitter sometimes take things too far. Things like death threats or misogynistic insults, I don't support that, and I've called it out in the past. Like when the leftist streamer Vaush, drama alert, who is not trans, tweeted at J.K. Rowling, "Women be quieter and start apologizing challenge." I called him out, tweeting, "Doing edgy ironic misogyny while defending trans people magnifies the grain of truth in what TERFs say about there being misogyny in trans activism."
True.
I tweeted that because I recognize that if people who are claiming to speak for you are doing so in a misogynistic way, and if you let that slide, you're going to wake up one day to find that you're in a misogynistic movement. Of course, Vaush took the criticism really well, explaining that actually, I just didn't understand the complex tactical arguments for the moral necessity of being misogynistic to J.K. Rowling. And then he accused me of cancel culturing him while at the same time literally telling his followers to publicly shame me.
The more of you are in the replies being like, that's not what's happening right here. Like, this is necessary, okay? Publicly shame her into changing her mind on that.
Then bringing up my past struggle with addiction.
Move you off this site and into... I don't want to bring up the substance abuse.
So that pretty much confirms to me that Vaush doesn't actually care about advocating for trans people and just uses trans rights as a pretext to act like a dingus. I won't tell you to publicly shame him though, because unlike Vaush, I would never sink to that. The point I'm trying to make is I have no qualms about calling out people on my side whenever they go too far or cross a line, or do stupid tweets and then mansplain to me about how I don't understand tactical misogyny. Idiot. But the same cannot be said of J.K. Rowling. I have never once seen her call out any of the bigotry and abusiveness that is absolutely rampant in the gender-critical movement. There's a great video called J.K. Rowling's New Friends by YouTuber Sean that exposes the dishonesty of framing this conflict as meek, concerned feminists versus the abusive trans mob. A framing that the witch trials of J.K. Rowling accepts uncritically, citing numerous examples of death threats and abusiveness from trans advocates.
Things like kill TERFs 2014. How about slowly and horrendously murder TERFs in saw-like torture machines and contraptions?
Oh no, Vaush, what's happening?
People in saw traps. But also, how serious is this threat that was posted to Tumblr in 2014? Let's use our critical thinking skills here. Do you think that Jigsaw, the villain from the Saw movies, has a Tumblr account and is threatening TERFs? Or do you think this was posted by a 14-year-old? The podcast cites 0 examples of death threats and abusiveness from anti-trans bigots. And it's not exactly like you have to dig deep to find any. I can fill the screen up with examples just from people who J.K. Rowling has explicitly supported or interacted with. "I will drive you out into the desert and bury you 9 feet down," one tweet says, from a fan of J.K. Rowling. "First I'll set you on fire and piss on your half-alive corpse.
Damn.
Fuck trans activism, fuck gender ideology,
Yikes.
and fuck you."
Yikes.
Another threat from the same user is so graphically violent and sexual, I don't know if I can even read it aloud without violating the YouTube terms of service. But threats like this from the gender critical side are simply not mentioned in the witch trials of J.K. Rowling. Both Rowling and Meghan seem happy to cherry-pick threatening tweets and sound bites of shouting protesters,
Fuck you, you ugly piece of shit! You look like you got your teeth knocked out, you fucking fascist!
as evidence that the trans movement is dangerous and insidious to the core. But this exact technique has been used against literally every liberation movement in world history. For example, let's consider Reclaim the Night, the protest movement against sexual violence in Britain, which first got J.K. Rowling interested in feminism in the 1970s. Here's how The Guardian, Britain's spineless centrist paper of note, covered a Reclaim the Night protest in 1979. "Chanting slogans against rape seems reasonable to promote awareness, but what about the hissing and swearing at any innocent male, and cries of castrate men? We were all sympathetic to the principles of the women's liberation movement, but we left the crowd of shouting, torch-bearing women when it became clear that my friend's brother was running the risk of personal mutilation if he remained with us." The protesters were allegedly singing, "Here I stand, my knife in hand, free castration on demand. So this is how the British press covered the women's movement. Angry, torch-bearing women screaming, "Castrate men!" Now, is that a fair representation of the women's movement? Should we judge every movement by its most militant extremists? Is it fair, say, to pretend that Valerie Solanas, who shot Andy Warhol, who advocated for male extermination in her Society for Cutting Up Men manifesto, is representative of feminism as a whole? Many anti-feminists over the years have done exactly that. But it's not fair, is it? So why does J.K. Rowling think it's fair to judge the trans movement by the worst things trans people have ever tweeted?
I want her to choke on my fat trans dick.
And I made excuses for you then.
In the 4th episode of The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, Megan interviews New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg, who has written sympathetically about transphobic feminism. There's a moment in this interview where Michelle kind of stumbles into an honest observation that I find fascinating.
Right. I mean, I think you'll often hear people say, you know, I'm not going to debate my basic humanity. And part of the difficulty is that there are indeed certain issues which we have sort of decided somewhat collectively with some sort of consensus are beyond the realm of debate. And I think that part of what is so difficult about this issue is that there's certain people who think that this kind of consensus can be imposed maybe as opposed to evolve organically. And so they're sort of desperately trying to shore it up in the hopes, I think, that if they can, they will enjoy the same sort of assumed protection as other groups whose rights we've decided are not up for public conversation. I think the problem is that we don't actually have a consensus.
So Michelle correctly observes that the reason trans people
She didn't sound like she stumbled into that at all. That sounded pretty clear and concise, but
are often reluctant to debate our rights is that we want the same assumed protections as other groups whose rights liberals have decided are not up for debate. But then, Michelle suggests that trans people have to debate our rights because there isn't a mainstream consensus that we deserve rights. I am really curious to know how Michelle Goldberg thinks that past liberation movements have succeeded. Like, does she think that women's suffrage just evolved organically? Did suffragettes just have calm, civil conversations about whether women are intellectually capable of voting until all the misogynists were rationally persuaded? No, they stood up and demanded their right to vote. Sometimes violently, especially in the UK. Like, people forget this, maybe because they were called suffragettes, which is kind of a cutesy name, but the suffragettes, they murdered people. They were suffragette terrorists. They broke windows, they bombed churches, they set fire to a theater. In 1909, a suffragette attacked Winston Churchill with a horsewhip. Queen shit, honestly. The English suffragette Mary Lee threw a fucking hatchet at the Prime Minister's head. And my point is not to advocate terrorism or to excuse the terrorism of past movements. I think these kinds of tactics have tended to turn people against the movement. I don't think it's effective, but let's not pretend that past movements have never made demands before everyone was ready. Because there never has been, and there never will be a time when everyone is ready. I mean, Mary Wollstonecraft published The Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, and misogyny, in case you hadn't noticed, remains rampant. So there never has been a consensus about women's rights, and there probably never will be.
Well, there can be a consensus about something without it being like, nobody disagrees. Like, there's a consensus around, like, slavery and it not being okay, but there's probably still some people that are pro-slavery in the United States, no?
In fact, marginalized groups wouldn't need rights if there was a consensus that we deserve rights. The whole reason to have rights is to protect you from the kind of people who think you shouldn't have them. I mean, it's a nice thought that we can just politely persuade everyone to give us rights, but the reality is, that's not how this works, and it never has been. Like, how do these debate me centrists think that slavery ended in the United States? Well, between 1861 and 1865, there was a little event called the American Civil Debate.
Yeah, but again, so like, I feel like I don't know if she's intentionally done this. She's walked into an area where it's like, oh yeah, like in the past, the way that we did this was through civil war. So let's like keep, like, I don't know. I find this video like largely unconvincing.
See what I'm holding in my hand? This is a high caliber idea. that I picked off the polite discussion field of Manassas. Do you people think that American schools were integrated because all the white people in the South were persuaded that segregation is bad? No, dum-dums. Eisenhower had to send in the 101st Airborne to enforce that shit at gunpoint. And my point is not to equate LGBT rights movements with black civil rights. I am aware that being a white queer person is not in any way equivalent to living in the aftermath of slavery. I'm just saying that there's this tendency to sanitize history and to imagine that progress was smooth and bloodless, that consensus evolved organically, when it just didn't. And then people get the impression that current movements are somehow more militant than successful past movements when they just aren't.
I am fighting what I see as a powerful, insidious, misogynistic movement, the cultural movement that was illiberal in its methods. And I believe absolutely that there is something dangerous about this movement, and it must be challenged.
Why is J.K. Rowling like this? Chapter 7. Why is J.K. Rowling like this? J.K. Rowling loves to quote radical feminist Andrea Dworkin, whomst I've already mentioned a couple times in this video.
I myself favor violence. Deeply. I favor it.
Dworkin is known for her extreme sex-negative views, which I don't agree with, but she was an interesting writer, one of those half-crazed savants who gets in your head, who you can't stop thinking about. In my opinion, Dworkin's best book is Right-Wing Women, published in 1983, the era of Phyllis Schlafly and Anita Bryant. Right-Wing Women is an analysis of why so many women are drawn to conservative politics, seemingly against their own interests. Anyone who's interested in understanding the gender-critical movement, a crypto-reactionary backlash disguising itself as feminism, should read this book. In Dworkin's analysis,
the political right makes certain metaphysical and material promises to women that both exploit and quiet some of women's deepest fears. No one can bear to live a meaningless life. Women fight for meaning just as women fight for survival.
And conservative politics promises women meaning.
The right offers women a simple, fixed, predetermined social, biological, and sexual order. Form conquers chaos. Form banishes confusion.
The gender-critical movement offers women a brutally simple understanding of sex and gender. A woman is an adult human female. Right-wing anti-trans activist Posey Parker has made this phrase into the motto of the gender-critical movement. Adult human female. It's on billboards, it's on t-shirts, it's on banners, signs, and tweets. Presented with the authority of a dictionary definition, it's rigid, it's orderly, it's immutable. There are no exceptions, there are no blurred lines, there can be no change. This mantra is a defense against the conceptual instability and chaos that gender criticals fear. The same fear that once drove homophobic women like Anita Bryant.
Erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives.
Dworkin says,
within the frame of male domination, there is a good reason for women to hate homosexuality, both male and female. Women are interchangeable as sex objects. Women are slightly less disposable as mothers. The only dignity and value women get is as mothers. Having children is the one social contribution credited to women. It is the bedrock of women's social worth. Without childbearing, women know they have nothing. Homosexuality for women means having nothing. It means extinction.
Substitute transgenderism for homosexuality, and you'll understand the gender-critical movement. J.K. Rowling's definition of woman is this.
The woman is the producer of the large gametes.
The producer of the large gametes. Rowling says her primary concern about young trans men is the loss of fertility.
Homosexuality, its rise in public visibility, attempts to socially legitimize or protect it, makes women expendable. The one thing women can do and be valued for will no longer be valued. Male homosexuality is especially terrifying because it suggests a world without women altogether, a world in which women are extinct.
This exact
What the
fear
fuck?
appears frequently in gender-critical rhetoric. Trans activists are erasing women. They're erasing biological sex. They're going to call us pregnant people. Confused girls are being robbed of their precious fertility. Trans women are going to replace biological women.
As a woman, I feel threatened because biological men are aggressively replacing women.
You will not replace us!
Sometimes this paranoia ramps up to the point of obsession, and the results can be dazzling. In September 2022, Maya Forstater, who you'll remember as the anti-trans activist whom J.K. Rowling came out as a TERF to defend, went on a full-blown Twitter rampage because the Hertfordshire County Libraries announced they were changing their children's storytime mascot from the Book Start Bear. If you don't know where this is going, strap in, from the Book Start Bear to a bright, vibrant, gender-neutral creature called Tala. Are you enraged? If not, you haven't been spending enough time on Mumsnet. Maya tweeted the words of an indignant mother who referred to Talia, wait, wasn't it Tala? Referring to Talia as a trans bear with they-them pronouns, describing the mascot as ideological, creepy, and gaslighting. I cannot express how upset I feel. The library jumped in to clarify that Tala, not Talia, isn't trans, they are an alien. Maya then demanded to know how this alien was birthed. Did it hatch from an egg, or was it born
I feel like equally cringe on the other side. I feel like, didn't this happen with Apex Legends, where they said that like the robot character was non-binary? It's like, okay.
From a mama. Some people tried to reason with Maya. There's an advantage in having a character that isn't identifiably male or female, as it can be equally relatable to either sex and avoid promoting gender stereotypes. But Maya was not convinced. It seems highly unlikely that an alien.
It wasn't the robot character, it was Bloodhound? Oh, wait, I thought it was a robot character. Or am I thinking of Overwatch? Was it the robot character in Overwatch?
Is not sexually reproducing. It's a relatable anthropomorphic character, not a slime mold.
Bastion? Yeah, maybe? I don't know. Maybe.
I need to know how the alien fucks right now. I said I need to know how the alien fucks before I can show it to my child. When Twitter understandably laughed it up at Maya's expense, she just kept posting. And she posted hard. Honestly, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone post so hard. In a lengthy diatribe, Maya wrote about the miseries of new motherhood. You are in charge of a baby. You have never done this before. You haven't had a good night's sleep for months and won't for years. Everyone has an opinion on what you are doing right and wrong, and you've become invisible. You had politics. You had a career. You had interests. You had a sex life. Now you have the daily needs of a completely dependent person, and your world has shrunk. The fact that these men and the young women that cheer them on think this is so laughable reflects society's disdain for mothers. This is what it means to say a woman is not a feeling or a costume. This is why the hub of the resistance is on Mumsnet. So I am fascinated by this thread. I think it's one of the most revealing texts in gender critical history, because you know what? Maya Forstater actually does have valid concerns. But the concerns she has that are valid have nothing to do with trans people. And they definitely have nothing to do with an adorable cartoon alien. Honestly, reading this, I have some concerns. Concerns like, where is Maya's husband? I know she has one. Isn't raising children supposed to be a mutual project? No one should have to feel this alone raising children. That is a valid concern. Oh my god, we actually found one. It's like finding El Dorado. A valid concern. A valid concern. Isn't what's going on here that Maya is taking legitimate feelings of being overburdened and underappreciated and displacing those feelings onto transgender people? This is exactly how the gender critical movement recruits. By providing a scapegoat to frustrated women. It's not your husband's neglect, it's not the increasing atomization of society, it's not the indignities of aging, it's Tala, the non-binary alien, with its dungarees and smug aura of gender neutrality. Mumsnet is the hub of the resistance. to non-binary cartoons. It's too much. These people are too much. Okay, we have to be serious now. The political right also promises women safety and security.
For women, the world is a very dangerous place. The right acknowledges the reality of danger, the validity of fear. The right then manipulates the fear.
Women fear and resent male violence, which they're most likely to experience from the men closest to them. Boyfriends, husbands, and fathers.
They're most likely to be killed by sexual partners.
But the need to survive in a male-dominated society means that women's legitimate fears and resentments often cannot be directed at the men with power.
Inevitably, this causes women to take the rage and contempt they feel for the men who actually abuse them, those close to them, and project it onto others, those far away, foreign, or different.
And this displacement of rage is just transparently what's going on with J.K. Rowling. In her essay about sex and gender issues, Rowling speculates that trans men are transitioning to be the son her father wanted.
I really felt the rejection of my father, and that is one of the things that maybe leads someone going into homosexuality.
And she describes the lingering trauma from her first violent marriage.
The marriage at this point has turned very violent and very controlling.
And that, she says, is why she decided to speak out against the transgender movement. If you try to understand this rationally, it looks like a total non sequitur, but if you look at it emotionally, there's a kind of logic to it.
The existence of the dangerous outsider always functions for women simultaneously as deception, diversion, painkiller, and threat. Women cling to irrational hatreds focused particularly on the unfamiliar, so that they will not murder their fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, lovers, the men with whom they are intimate, those who do hurt them.
In the 1970s, many conservative women displaced this rage onto lesbians, the threatening outsider of the day. Dworkin attended the National Women's Conference in 1977, where she spoke to a lot of women about their fear of lesbians.
Right-wing women consistently spoke to me about lesbians as if lesbians were rapists, certified committers of sexual assault against women and girls. To them, the lesbian was inherently monstrous, experienced almost as a demonic sexual force hovering closer and closer. She was the dangerous intruder, encroaching, threatening by her very presence a sexual order that cannot bear scrutiny or withstand challenge.
It's almost surreal to read this because of how precisely it describes how gender criticals talk about trans women.
Pronouns are like Rohypnol. They dull your defenses.
True.
They change your inhibitions. They're meant to.
Now, it's true that trans exclusionary radical feminism began as an offshoot of far-left lesbian separatism, with academic feminist Janice Raymond writing in 1979 that transsexualism should be morally mandated out of existence. But the gender critical movement was always destined to become a right-wing movement because it has the structure of a right-wing movement, taking women's fear and rage toward familiar men and displacing it onto an unfamiliar outsider. The momentum behind this is just too ripe an opportunity for conservatives to pass up. As Dworkin says,
because women so displace their rage, they are easily controlled and manipulated haters. Women require symbols of danger that justify their fear. The right provides these symbols of danger by designating clearly defined groups of outsiders as sources of danger.
In the 2020s, anti-trans bigotry has become a keystone of Conservative Party platforms, both in the UK, where Lee Anderson, deputy chair of the Conservative Party, predicts that the next election will be won on
probably a mixture of culture wars and trans debate,
and in the US, where the ACLU is currently tracking more than 450 anti-LGBT bills, including more than 130 gender-affirming care bans, 51 trans sports bans, 40 drag bans, 29 trans bathroom bans, and 21 bans defining trans people out of the law. Republicans have escalated anti-trans rhetoric to eliminationist extremes that have most trans people in this country living in a constant state of fear for our future.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
The left is attacking our children.
God, I want to debate that Michael Moe guy.
Sex talk, transgender extremism, and noxious politics in our schools. We should reject this demonic assault on the innocence of our children and stand fast against leftist efforts to mutilate their bodies and minds.
Stop
confusing our babies with your groomer gender ideologue.
Doing a live debate stream
revoke
tonight at the
every
University.
Biden policy promoting the chemical castration and sexual mutilation of our youth, and ask Congress to send me a bill prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states.
On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age.
A few gender criticals still want to insist they have nothing to do with right-wing anti-trans bigots, like Helen Lewis.
I mean, TERF is basically witch.
Who attempts in her interview in The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling to distinguish between the transphobia of the far right and that of feminists.
I think the hardest thing for outsiders to understand is that there are two different arguments going on. One is the traditional conservative right argument, which is anti-LGBT. The other one is a criticism from the left, in which it says sometimes male people and female people have different interests, no matter how the male people identify.
But as a trans person, I don't care whether you justify your transphobia in the name of protecting women or protecting children. Whether it's radical feminist Janice Raymond calling for transsexualism to be morally mandated out of existence, or conservative Catholic Michael Knowles calling for transgenderism to be eradicated from public life, is the same repulsive bigotry to me. And in any case, the gender-critical movement has recently reached an implicit consensus that they're mostly done pretending to be feminist. The rising star of the movement, Posey Parker, aka Kelly J. Keane Minshall, rejects feminism entirely.
Do you call yourself a feminist now?
No.
Did you ever call yourself a feminist?
I probably did for a short time.
But so you wouldn't be sort of like a Julie Bindel type feminist?
No, well, some feminists, I mean, Julie Bindel has been critical of mothers in the past, and I think that's a theme flowing through feminism. I'm not a feminist! I'm not a feminist!
This is not Andrea Dworkin. This is Phyllis Schlafly. Parker's campaign is currently funded by the right-wing CPAC.
CPAC came along and said that they would sponsor our events and cover all of our insurance throughout our whole trip, which is really kind of them. But what we would need to do is we would need to show that we were working for them, working with them.
She has no qualms about collaborating with far-right white nationalists.
I want to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let me tell you what she's been saying. She's a Republican, but I agree with her wholeheartedly.
She's opposed abortion and contraception for teenagers.
Why are we enabling children to take sometimes contraceptives that are quite harmful, or access to abortion? I think that we really need to rethink all of this. I think parents need to take back control of their children.
She's called trans people fools and perverts.
Transgenderism is nuts. It's for fools and perverts.
She's denied that transgender is a legitimate concept.
It's not a real thing. There's no such thing as being born in the wrong body. There's no such thing as a trans woman. There's no such thing as a trans person. There is no such thing. There are people that call themselves these things that may have other issues manifesting that then make them think they're this. But no, we have to stop using any words like transgender. There may be more words that we have to say in order to say that. We may call it transgender ideology, but when it comes to a person, they may be following transgender ideology, but they are not transgender. There is no such thing as a man or a woman being anything other than a man or a woman.
She's called trans women pedophiles.
We know that if a man has a paraphilia of dressing as a woman, the most likely cross paraphilia is paedophilia. We know that these men have multiple paraphilias. They don't ever stop at one.
She's said that each and every woman who stands in her way will be annihilated.
Each and every one of you women who stand in my way, each and every one of you, let me just tell you, you will be annihilated.
She's called on armed men to enter women's restrooms to attack anyone they perceive as not a real woman.
And men, for once, I'm talking to you. I'm talking about you dads who maybe carry, I think that's what you say. I'm so down with the American lingo. Maybe you carry, maybe you don't.
Maybe you consider yourself a protector of women. Maybe you're that sort of man. Maybe you have a daughter or a mother or a wife. Maybe you have a sister. Maybe you just have some friends. Maybe you just think women are human and you don't need any absolute connection with them to feel compelled to protect us. I think you should start using women's toilets, men.
And she said that women who call themselves men should be sterilized, which seems to be a little bit in tension with J.K. Rowling's concern about the fertility of confused girls. You know, you might look at these differences of opinion between Rowling and Parker, little things.
Jesus. Also, wait, hold on. If I kill both halves of this dragon, does the mission end? I don't have to worry about protecting my keep. I can just go and kill the dragon parts, right?
Like pro-feminist versus anti-feminist, left versus right, pro-abortion versus anti-abortion, concern about trans men's fertility versus advocating forced sterilization of trans men, against annihilating women who stand in your way versus pro-annihilating each and every woman who stands in your way. You might look at these differences and expect that these two women would be at odds, but they aren't. Because promoting anti-trans bigotry is a common cause that for both of them trumps all else. In 2020, Posey Parker paid for a poster reading "I Heart J.K. Rowling" to be displayed at a railway station in Edinburgh, and Rowling has tweeted in defense of Parker numerous times and has modeled her t-shirts. So, the gender-critical movement, started by lesbian separatists in the 1970s, has finally passed into the hands of Pound Shop Ava Browns, as gender-critical lesbian Julie Bindel memorably described them. It's a movement that has no beliefs apart from a shared determination to reduce the number of trans people.
In the numbers we're currently seeing, particularly of young people coming forward, I find cause for doubt.
Yes. In the meantime, while we're trying to get through to the decision makers, we have to try to limit the harm. And that means reducing or keeping down the number of people who transition. And that's for two reasons. One of them is that every one of those people is a person who's been damaged. But the second one is every one of those people
potential
is
ally.
Basically, you know, a huge problem to a sane world. Like if you've got people that, whether they're transitioned, whether they're happily transitioned, whether they're unhappily transitioned, whether they're detransitioned, if you've got people who've dissociated from their sex in some way, every one of those people is someone who needs special accommodation in a sane world where we re-acknowledge the truth of sex.
So to wrap this up, is the backlash against J.K. Rowling a witch hunt? Unequivocally, no. It's very thoroughly deserved. But I will say this. A movement can't get along without a devil. And across the whole political spectrum, there's a misogynistic tendency to choose a female devil. Whether it's Anita Bryant, Hillary Clinton, Marie Antoinette, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or J.K. Rowling. And there's always going to be people who seize on any opportunity to be misogynistic. So, I would advise trans people and our allies to keep in mind that J.K. Rowling is not the final boss of transphobia. She's not our devil. The devil is the Republican Party, the Conservative Party. The devil is patriarchy. It's the right-wing men who will be the ones to put gender-critical theory into brutal practice. Anita Bryant, Posey Parker, and J.K. Rowling are, to borrow a term from TERFs, handmaidens. TERFs are the real handmaidens. They're useful idiots who put a concerned female face on the patriarchal violence against trans people that will ultimately be enacted by right-wing men.
I call on men who consider themselves decent human beings to call out the deviants among them and eradicate these monsters from society.
And Megan Phelps Roper and centrists like her are wrong that civil conversation can resolve this.
Call out the deviants among them and eradicate these monsters from society.
People like Michael Knowles and Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump cannot be persuaded. They have to be defeated. As for what to do about J.K. Rowling, honestly, let's all just block her. Open up Twitter right now, go to her profile, and just block her. problem solved. Like, don't harass her, that doesn't help, but also, I wouldn't wait for her to change. She's gone down what I call the bigotry whirlpool. The deeper you go in, the harder it is to leave, for the same reasons that it's hard to quit a cult or scam. To quote video essayist Dan Olson,
one of the most insidious elements of a confidence scam is that the victims who invested the most are often the most passionate defenders, because shame is a powerful force in the human psyche, and they can't—
Why the fuck are they talking about Star Citizen out of nowhere?
Can't bear the shame of admitting they were tricked.
Reformed bigots have to face not only the shame of being dupes, but also the guilt of having devoted years of life to harming vulnerable people. This is something Megan, to her credit, faced head-on. If we were wrong, then I had spent every day of my life industriously sowing doom, discord, and rage to so many, not at the behest of God, but of my grandfather. I had wasted my life only to fill others with pain and misery. Most bigots cannot stand to face this moral sunk cost. It's why an obsessive bigot like Graham Linehan, whose all-consuming hatred of trans people has ruined his life, cost him his marriage, and left him alone to tweet about destroying gender ideology minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve, feels psychologically compelled to insist with ever more certainty that trans people are not just delusional or dangerous, but are all demonic perverts, an enemy so hyperbolically evil that they justify his self-immolating crusade.
They took everything from me, you know. They took my family, Jesus. You know. And I just said, no, hang on a sec. Stop calling these women TERFs. Stop sending them abuse. Let them speak. And for that, they just destroyed me.
Do you honestly feel destroyed?
No, because the one thing about this that keeps me going is that I know I'm right, you know. I know I'm right.
As long as he stays here, in the bottom of the whirlpool, he never has to face that he's ruined his relationships and wasted years of life because he just couldn't let it go. And if J.K. Rowling doesn't log off soon, this will likely be her fate as well. I guess what I'm really trying to say is, Harry Potter's dead to me. I'm switching to Twilight.